In this presentation, we'll take a look at a navigation overview. We'll look at the major components for navigating around Xero. Here we are in our Get Great Guitars file for Xero, and by the way, you might just call it Xero here. I typically call it Xero. It helps me to spell it, so I'll probably be going back and forth from Xero to Xero as I name the software here. So in any case, we're here and we're in our Get Great Guitars file. One of the nice things that we have about Xero is that you are able to change between multiple files. You can have multiple different files that you are working in. So if I select the drop down here, for example, we're in the Get Great Guitars file. We have the demo file here, and that's going to be the demo from Xero, the Xero team, providing the demo file for us to basically practice with. And then, of course, we're in our Get Great Guitars, and we can set up another file if we so choose. Great tool for practicing and getting used to the software, as well as working, just navigating through many different files. Now, we don't have any data yet in the Get Great Guitars file. Therefore, for navigation purposes, we're going to start off with the demo file. So we're going to select the drop down here. We're going to go to the demo company. So we'll take a look at the demo company, and that'll help us to have some numbers populated. So when we go through the navigation component of the course, we can take a look at different numbers within it. And then in the second half of the course, we'll go back to our Get Great Guitars file, and we'll start a new company file from scratch so we can practice that data input from scratch, setting up the new company often being one of the more difficult components to the process. So in any case, I love that fact that we have that easy kind of switch between the different type of organizations, and that we can practice between the demo version and our company file, and even have multiple company files that we can practice with even within the 30-day free trial period. Now, when you're on the dashboard, you're going to have some of these little screens down below, which will be the checking account, the account watch list, the savings account, and so on and so forth, which will give you kind of a snapshot and will give you some data input screens that you can go into with these little three dots on the side. So we'll talk a little bit more about that later, but I want to point out the major navigation features here within Xero, and that's going to be up top. So those are going to be those items up top here. So of course we have the navigation between the different accounts mainly here. We have the dashboard tab up top. Then we have the business items. Within the business items, we will have our major type of activities that we would have that would be like business related, which include the invoice, the quotes, and the sales overviews on the sales side of things. Then we have the bills, the purchases, and the purchase overview on the purchases side of things. Then we have the accounting dropdown, where we have the bank accounts, reports, advanced. And then some of the major reports are already even in here. So the balance sheet and the P&L, or the balance sheet and profit and loss or income statement, are already here. Those are basically the major financial statements that you're going to be opening all the time. Then we have the projects tabs. So we have all projects, time entries, and so on and so forth. And then the contacts. So these are going to be the major drop-down tabs that you'll be using as you enter data into the system and going back and forth from reports. The other major place that you'll go to enter data may be this little plus item over here, where you'll have some of the similar icons. Note that there's multiple ways to get into some of the same items, including the invoice, the bill, the contact, the quote, the purchase order, manual journal, spend money, receive money, transfer money. So this is another way that the major kind of like forms or documents or data input forms are going to be under this plus item as well. Now, just some things that I want to point out to navigate around an online software. And I'm going to compare this and contrast this a bit to QuickBooks Desktop and QuickBooks Online, because that's what I'm more used to. You may be moving from some kind of software to Xero from something like a desktop software that would look more kind of like this. And a desktop software such as QuickBooks Desktop doesn't change so often over time. So it's a good kind of comparison to go back and forth. Also, the desktop version of QuickBooks has this nice little flowchart, and it's nice for us to basically try to tie out the activities by cycle here, and then look at the forms that QuickBooks has and see if we can tie over the similar kind of functions. So we'll think about the forms, we'll think about the journal entry related to the forms, what kind of accounts will be affected for them, and see if we can find those similar type of functions within Xero and see the similar kind of process. So it's nice to see this like flowchart type of process. And then go over to think about the online process. Also note that if you take a look at Xero and you take a look at QuickBooks Online, you have kind of a similar navigation pattern, right? QuickBooks Online, this is QuickBooks Online, has a hamburger bar on the left that you can open and close, and has some more kind of categories over here. And then it also has basically this plus item, which will give you most of the major functions that you'll be using within the software. So there's a couple different ways you can get into it. But you'll note the format between the online, QuickBooks Online, and Xero are a lot different than QuickBooks Desktop. So both QuickBooks Online, so there must be something to that when you have the web-based version. They're having a lot different kind of look and feel than the desktop version, whether you're using QuickBooks or Xero as compared to QuickBooks Desktop. So here we are back in Xero. A couple navigation things I just want to point out. And while we do that, I want to do this while we open up some of the major reports. So I'm going to go to the accounting dropdown. I'm going to be opening up the balance sheet. This is one of our major reports. Now, one thing you might want to do is to be comparing and contrasting, data input screen to the reports. If you look at QuickBooks Desktop, basically you could do that by having this kind of open windows over on the side. So I can jump from the home tab to like this tab to the sales tab and back to the home tab. It's nice to have open windows up like that. If you look at the online versions, whether it be QuickBooks Online or Xero, it's a little bit different. It takes a little bit getting used to, but once you get used to it, not so bad. So here's the balance sheet. What you can do over here is you can right click on the tab up top. So I'm going to right click on the tab up top and duplicate that tab. And again, this takes a little bit of getting used to, but once you get used to it, it's not too bad. So in other words, if you look at the desktop version, we can navigate in the open windows to the left. And if you look at the online version, you basically navigate through different windows or different reports you can have open up top. So that would be the balance sheet. And I can do the same thing. I can go back to the tab to the left now, and I can open up the accounting and then go to the income statement and do a similar process. Now you'll note as it loads up, it does take a little bit more space than a desktop version, at least in terms of bandwidth, internet space, obviously, because the desktop version is on the desktop. So you're going to need a strong internet connection if you're going to be opening multiple windows and whatnot at the same time. But it works in a similar fashion. If I right click up top again and I duplicate, this is often what I will do, because then I can have the balance sheet open and I can have the income statement open, and then I can go back to this first tab and I can work on information. So that's one thing that you want to keep in mind. That's a useful thing to have in mind as we navigate through this, and we'll do that multiple times as we go. Also note that in the desktop version, there's also a thing where you can have dual screens. So if I go to the View tab and I want to switch to multi-monitors, you can ask, well, what if I have two monitors? Or if I want to put something side by side, I can't do that so much if they're in the same tab. And you're probably imagining what you would do here. You could open up, of course, another tab, right? You can open up another whole browser screen and then copy and paste into that browser screen. So I can go back over here and copy this and then go back to my other browser and paste that in here. And then I can have these two screens kind of side by side. I can manipulate these screens side by side or put them on two different computer screens and have a data input screen and my report on the other side. Now, as you do this, I'm going to close this back out. Just recall that when you go to different tabs here, you'll have to refresh them from time to time by using the old refresh item over here, or just click on the URL, highlight it, and hit enter to refresh it to make sure that the current data is being populated as you enter the data, possibly into the left tab, as I usually do it, and then have your reports on the right. Then you're going to have to refresh the screen from time to time to make sure the reports are pulling up. So it takes a little bit getting used to. If you're a younger user, you probably do this quite well. If you're used to using desktop type applications, then it may feel a bit different to be using that kind of online navigation process. So then if you go, other thing to just keep in mind here, just like any kind of software, you can also zoom in, and we'll do this oftentimes as well. So if I'm in the balance sheet, for example, and I hold down Control on my keyboard, I'm on a Windows-based keyboard, and I scroll up using the mouse, then you can see it navigates in. I'm at 125%. So that's one way you can navigate in, and you can scroll in and see more information a bit more clearly. Now, as you do that, just remember that it works really well on the reports, but when you go back to the data input screen, it could cause some problems as you go to the data input screens, because you'll note that as you scroll up, as I do it here, it'll actually change the format of the screen. So some things might populate a bit differently if I go back to the dashboard. as you increase the screen size, because it's trying to optimize the space of the screen as you scroll in and go into it deeper. So if I do this again, you'll see it starts to move things around down here. When you take a look at data input forms, that could cause problems with the data input forms. So anytime I do data input, typically I'll go back to 100%, right? I'll scroll down to 100%, do the data input so it doesn't do anything funny as we do the data input, then jump over to the reports by going to the tab, in this case to the right on the income statement. And then here I might do the scrolling in and go in deeper as I analyze the reports, which typically handle the scrolling in and the zooming much more easily, much better. Going back to the first tab, also note as we go through this, we're basically going to be comparing the cycle. So it's useful to kind of visualize, well, how am I going to group all this stuff together? There's a lot of information. How am I going to think about how to input this? I like the tool on the QuickBooks desktop, which is basically a flowchart here. So this is QuickBooks desktop, just to get an idea of the flowchart that they have. So as we do this, I'll actually bounce around as we get through the navigation part of the course to the desktop version, just so we can see the flowchart and then see the related forms. So we're going to be breaking things out by cycle. We can think of things by cycle, accounting processes by cycle. For example, the vendor cycle, which can be called the accounts payable cycle, or just the payable cycle, purchases cycle. And that would include us basically entering bills possibly, and then paying bills with checks. And if we deal with inventory, we'd have the more detailed inventory items up top. So we can think about that and think about, well, what would happen if I entered a bill? What are the accounts that are affected? Typically, we're going to have accounts payable go up, and the other side, meaning we owe money, and the other side being an expense. And so then we can think about, well, is there a similar kind of bill over here in Xero that we can go to the enter bill icon here, and we have a similar kind of process. So we have to be able to convert, the accounts that are going to be affected, the transactions that are going to happen, the two accounts at least that are affected by each of these forms. QuickBooks would call them forms, so I'm probably going to keep calling them forms, the data input forms that we will have. What's going to be the effect on the financial statements of them. So, and to do that, it's nice to have a visualization of the flowchart. When we pay it, we'll write a check, decrease in the checking account, decrease in the accounts payable. What about the customers? We'll have an invoice, so we'll be invoicing. What does an invoice do? Well, an invoice increases accounts receivable, and it increases sales, and may also have to deal with inventory as well. And so we can look for a similar process over here on the invoicing side and say, there's the invoice. So similar, what happens after the invoice? We're going to get paid. We're going to receive a payment, which will increase in some way the cash in the checking account or in some other account, wherever we put it. And the other side is going to be decreasing the receivable. So we're going to have some kind of payment that's going to be received. So what if I get paid at the same time that I do the work? Well, then we just create a sales receipt, right? And that's going to increase income and cash at the same point in time. And we could think of payroll as a different cycle as well. So it's useful for us to basically go back and forth and think about things by cycle as a flowchart such as this. And if you're used to QuickBooks, then you can also, or even if you're not, it's useful to see these forms, the typical forms that are going to be in this kind of linear flowchart fashion, and then find them in Xero. And as we visualize this flowchart, we can better visualize what is going to be the effect of each form on the financial statements, that including the income statement and the balance sheet, the primary financial statements that we will be looking into and working with.